New York is simply 10 times Johannesburg. It is too confined. It feels like a prison. He preferred something else. The other interesting thing I picked up about this work is that the structure of the high-rise could well reference one of his favorite artists, Philip Guston, as you can see from the image on the left. This is the cover of a book of his works on paper. But in the book, I discovered something like this that reminds me very much of a high-rise building, although this, I think, is strictly speaking an image of a book, I think. But Robert liked Philip Guston's work quite a lot, and he may well have stumbled across this image. Now, the title of the work, Mimo, of course, refers to the long collaboration between Robert Hodgins, William Kentridge, and Deborah Bell. What you see on the left-hand side is really the cover of a teacher's guide for the exhibition at the Johannesburg Art Gallery in 1997, celebrating the collaboration, a 10-year collaboration between them. Sadly, no catalogue exists of this exhibition, but certainly it contained no fewer than 6 collaborative projects they worked on. They worked on print portfolios. As you can see there, the first one was Hogarth in Johannesburg from 1987 to coincide with the Johannesburg centenary celebrations. Little Models followed in 1990 and Ubu in 1997. But this particular work, Mimo, refers to their video collaborations. The first one being Easing the Passing of the Hours, 1990. Mimo came in 1994 and Hotel, 1997. I'm just showing you the cover again on the left of the catalogue of that first printmaking collaboration, Hogarth in Johannesburg. And on the right, you see one of the 8 Robert Hodgins etchings that he contributed to that series. Hogarth, as you know, is the 18th century British artist, satirizing the comings and goings of London society. These 3 artists felt that he was a good role model. So they chose certain models, if you like, from Hogarth to work on and to produce work. Robert Hodgins chose the Rake's Progress, and here you see sort of the high life, living the high life and the excesses of the Rake just before his downfall. Deborah Bell chose Marriage a la Mode, again, sort of marrying into wealth, but very unhappy marriage, and eventually leading to a death. William Kentridge chose Industry and Idleness, and again the rags to riches story, the worker marrying the boss's wife and becoming the mayor of London, in this case the mayor of Derby Road, a beggar that William Kentridge saw in the streets of Troyville at the time. And then the second one was Little Morals. This is Robert Hodgins's contribution. They are etchings, hand-colored with beautiful watercolors, very fresh works. This is Deborah Bell's contribution to the Models project, and we happen to be offering this series, complete series, beautifully framed, in our upcoming auction. It is lot 295. A very, very beautiful work. They're a bit out of focus, but the only image I could find of William Kentridge's Little Morals, and you can see many of the recurring images. This arc here with some sort of procession, the monument, and Felix in exile that you see over here. So recurring motifs in there. Coming to Ubu then, this is Robert Hodgins's contribution to the Ubu project, and he looked at different historical moments in world history where Ubu or the so-called dictator would reign supreme. The bottom left, for instance, you have the Führer, Hitler, occupying Paris, for example. This is Deborah Bell's contribution to the Ubu portfolio. And William Kentridge's famous Ubu Tells the Truth, also 9 beautiful prints. This leads me to some of the video collaborations. Hotel is perhaps the most famous one, and here are a couple of stills. Now you have to remember that the 3 of them would work on it collaboratively. One person would do the decor, another one the figures, and the likes. We were fortunate to sell 2 works so far from that particular series. One in 2013, an original work that was used in making the stop frame animation film, and very recently, last year, the end of last year, the work on the right. And it's interesting to look at the increase in price, you know, from 20,000 to just over $1 million. So not bad appreciation of value there. Another 2 stills from that. And then, so I'm coming back to our painting, because the first thing, when you look carefully, these rows of windows in the high-rise buildings are all occupied by little portraits. And that refers to, in my mind, these are a couple of stills from the Mimo video, where Robert Hodgins was the actual model for this particular video. I asked the William Kentridge studio to send me a display copy of Mimo, but they are in lockdown. The studio is completely closed, so this has to suffice. These are like strip films, but you get the idea, you know, the empty chair, the worker, and you know, the exasperation and the exhaustion that is captured over the 3 minutes duration of the video. It wasn't the first time that Robert was cast in a Kentridge film. The very first one was TNI from 1990. The TNI stands for Tristan and Isolde, that famous medieval love story. And this is a 12-minute film that Kentridge directed, and he filmed it in the FIG Gallery. Now, FIG stands for Famous International Gallery. Wayne Barker was involved, Warren Siebritz, and it was a Gunter Herbst as well. So it was sort of a collaborative management and direction of the gallery. Now, TNI is a very, very unknown video of Kentridge, because I think it was completely overshadowed by his very first famous stop frame animation, Johannesburg, second greatest city after Paris, which came the year before. And so I really had to hunt for this film, for this particular image, because of the 100+ books on Kentridge, this is literally the only image I could find. Clearly not Hodgins here, but he also involved other actors, other artists in making Tristan and Isolde. Robert played the role of King Mark of Cornwall in this particular medieval stories. But what I want to do now with the next couple of slides is to look at the use of architecture in Hodgins's work, because apart from those 2 those high rises flanking that picture plane of Mimo painting 1, you also have works such as this, and it has the title of London in the 1930s. And I'm intrigued by the architecture in the background there, referencing sort of a row of workers' cottages. He was from a working class background. And I think this is juxtaposed by a bridge over the Thames, leading to a better part maybe of London. When he came to South Africa on the invitation of his uncle, he worked on the Cape Town docks, and this is one of the works we offered, I think, in our very first contemporary auction some 2-3 years ago in February in Cape Town. And here you see the facade mainly, but I'm also interested in this little window of perhaps a sex worker admonishing a rowdy Hodgins after late at night leaving a bar, for instance. Here's another facade with various doors leading to all sorts of pleasures of the night. I think it's also important to juxtapose the exterior of the buildings with these complex psychological interiors that is also very typical of Robert Hodgins's work. And I'm particularly intrigued with this work, Bunker Beds, where you also get the sense of pigeonholing people, putting them in a little enclosed spaces. But look at this work, for instance. It is called Between the Acts at an opera or whatever. And again, you have these little vignettes of people obviously talking during interval and the likes. Now, the other interesting thing about our work is that Mimo, the video as well as the painting, references the working class. The video Mimo really is about a day in the life of a worker. And I think that is clearly juxtaposed with a very well-known icon in Hodgins's work, and that is of the businessman. The businessman in his suit and collar, as opposed to the worker, in this case, a mechanic. He also did boxes, for instance, like the image that you see on the right, and I suppose the mafia criminals on the left. So celebrating the underdog, if you like. So I think quite a complex work of Robert, a Mimo painting, but very interesting. The last thing about Robert that I want to mention is this wonderful tapestry. It is called New Orleans Dandy, and what you're looking at, the tapestry, is the work on the left. What you have on the right, top right, is what is known as the design. This is in fact a collage work, and it accompanies this wonderful tapestry, and the design is used to generate what is known as the cartoon that you see here. So it is a black and white outline, and when you look carefully, you will see a lot of numbers, and they, of course, refer to the color. It's a color coding that you see here. Now, the cartoon is used to put behind the warp. The warp, those very narrowly spaced, very taut, vertical and often are very strong cotton lines stretched over the loom, and then the weft, of course, the color going through that. But the cartoon is really the pattern for the weaver to know, how much of this area in what color to do. So, so that is the function of the cartoon that you see there. The second absolutely seminal work that I want to talk about is this one, Representations or Passum by Penny Siopis. Quite a major work, and it's really the second phase in a very illustrious career after these still lifes, these very excessive still lifes overflowing with food, and of course referencing the excesses of the political regime at the time, the mid-1980s. That gives way to a second phase in our art, the so-called historical paintings, where there is a shift away from the object to sort of like the figurative, to the personal. This is also the time that she develops, her interest in feminism, in history, in biography. And here you have another very big collage work. What she did was she would use heaps of old history textbooks, school textbooks, and she would cut out the images, the photographs in those books of Jan van Riebeeck and everything in between, and she would collage it in these works. Look at this particular work. This one is called Terra Incognito. So it is sort of inscribing the history of a country on the body, even inscribing something on her own body. This is her then partner, Colin Richards, who's sort of tattooing on Penny's back. I think our work is closely related to this work in the Standard Bank collection, especially in terms of sort of like the white shroud or cloth, or could, I suppose, be turned into a dress. Equally, this work, where you have the same figure, perhaps, dressed in a similar dress. This is Dora and the other woman. I'll talk a little bit about Dora in a second. And this particular work, it's also related to it. Again, the same white-clad figure here, but this one is called Invention de Hysterie, and it references a very interesting incident in Penny's life. In 1986, she won the APSA Atelier and she spent 6 months in Paris. One of the first things that she did was to go to close to the City International, where the studio, the APSA studio, is still located, was a mental institution. And she went there, and then she stumbled across the work done by a late 19th century psychiatrist, Jean-Martin Charcot. And I want to draw your attention to that part of the work, because it references this famous work. Here you have our good doctor, and he's demonstrating to an entirely male audience the notion of the hysterical woman. And when I go back to our lot, this work that you see here is nothing else but a reproduction of that Charcot image here. What you also see is, part of the hysterical body would be that she would sort of rip open her bosom, or show her genitalia, or whatever. So a very, very, very sort of important work, something that Sigmund Freud later took up. And Dora was also one of his, well, probably his most famous female hysteric woman, if you like. The other thing, interesting thing, when Penny was in Paris in 1986, was that she went to the Museum of Mankind, and she wanted to look at the body parts of Saartjie Baartman. They couldn't find the body parts. They could only show her a later cast that you see there, and she couldn't see it in 1986. She had to go back on a second trip to Paris in 1988 with a letter from Philip Tobias, one of her supervisors at WITS. She then got access to at least the cast there, and that led to another seminal work of Penny's, this time from 1994, for her exhibition, major exhibition at the Standard Bank Gallery. And here you see body parts of Saartjie. So this brings us back to this particular lot. The title, Representation. So I think clearly referencing the representation of Saartjie that you have here. Fascinating work. You have the model in the center there, possibly a self-portrait, possibly a historic figure, possibly a representation of another type of Saartjie. You have this very interesting interior, very complex composition here. You have the reference over here, and you have the shoes of, I suppose, either the painter painting this, or maybe a visitor looking at this. So the gaze, I think, is quite important in this. But I just want to look more closely at some of these images here, because they reference to some depictions, some representations of Sarah Baartman over the years. She was born in the Eastern Cape in the early 19th century, captured and taken to Cape Town, where she acted as a wet nurse, and captured again, taken to London, where she was exhibited as a freak, so to speak. And I want to draw your attention to this street scene in London. And over there, if you look at the cursor, there she is advertised, you know, with protruding sort of buttocks that is so characteristic of all the images of Sarah Baartman. And when you look closely, you will see that Penny, of course, clearly references these images in silhouette on all of these works pinned up on that. Of course, this is sort of a very intriguing topic, the so-called Hottentot Venus, ranging from the poet Stephen Gray calling his anthology of 1974, The Hottentot Venus, and many subsequent biographies and academic studies done on her life. I mentioned Freud. This is Penny doing an installation in the Freud Museum in London in 2005. Here you can see the installation. That is when she launched her Shame series, a famous series, small-scale etchings. We also sold a series of etchings some year or two ago. Here are 10 of them. And Penny was also included in the 2017 major exhibition at the British Museum with her history paintings. Okay, I think that is all I want to say, Alastair.
Wilhelm, I think there's a question from Annika. Is that, I see there's a hand up.
Go.
I'm not sure if it's a mistake or not.
Oh, well, maybe not, but
okay, maybe.
Was there a question? No. Well, thanks, Wilhelm. That was amazing. I mean, I think you showed so wonderfully how complex an artist Penny is in particular. And I mean, I love the fact that she's dealing with such weighty historical themes, yet in such a sort of seemingly shimmering, beautiful way. And that's just one of the reasons why her work is so special. And I mean, you emphasize the point, but a work like Representations is increasingly rare. You know, I think a lot of academics would identify that 80s, early 90s period as a high point. Of course, if you look at museum collections, institutional collections, they are all looking at works from those two periods. So to have one that almost straddles those two, you know, from the kind of Cake series and Excess, you know, into the history paintings is amazing, and we're very lucky to have it in the sale. But thanks so much for that. That was amazing. Arisha, I think you're going to take over and talk about some sort of contemporary photography.
Yes, I'm just going to share my screen quickly.
That's perfect. Yeah, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'm just going to be looking at quite briefly some of the photography featured on the auction. I think photography is something that has come up quite recently and is taking especially the contemporary market by a storm. So just to start off, we've got this Michael Subotzky photograph of Sally Little, the quite famous golfer. And what makes this work quite unique is the fact that the artist has smashed the glass intentionally. And I was actually hoping Wilhelm was going to talk a bit about Christo Coetzee, but for those of you who are familiar with Christo Coetzee's works, especially in the work After Japan that we've got featured on the auction, the artist in a fit of rage sort of slashed his own works and destroyed his own works, and then sort of repatch them back together to create a new body of work, which is quite interesting. And I guess the same sort of idea is shown here, where the artist has, in a moment, sort of taken what I would assume to be a hammer to the artwork, and intentionally smashing the work on the figure's face. And this sort of just makes the work quite unique. As far as I understand, this is the only one in the series that he has done this to. And it gives this work sort of another identity or another level of meaning to the item. I haven't found an exact quote or reference as to why he did this to this work, but it was definitely intentionally done. It's just a close-up of the broken glass, which is broken but stable. So I mean, it's not at risk of sort of shattering further or falling or cutting anyone. So it is done quite, in a way, neatly and preserved in that. Just a bit on Michael Subotzky. He's a Cape Town-based artist. He graduated from Mikhael's Fine Art School, and he won the Standard Bank Young Artist Award in 2012, which is quite a prestigious award. He's also participated in over 30 international and national exhibitions. Another work by the artist is this one, called Joe, Cape Town in Foreshore. And this work was actually, it's from a series called Umjingwana, which I hope I'm saying correctly, which means the outside. And this body of work was created as a counterpoint to Subotzky's first photographic series called Die Vier Hoeken, which means the four corners, which examined life and conditions inside Polsma prison in Cape Town. And so this series of photographs sort of followed that, where he followed the several, inmates and prisoners from that series to basically check up and see what they're doing now. And in these two bodies of work sort of talk to each other and comment on the life of these people, both within prison and after prison. It is quite once you see the full body of work, you get a better understanding of how in depth this photographic series is. But it basically shows the lived experiences of these figures. Going on to Greg Marinovich. So Greg Marinovich is, I think, one of my personal favorites in South African photography. He was part of the Bang Bang Club during the 90s, and I think his work really documented quite a few important parts in South African history, and I think his work has definitely contributed quite a lot to South African history, to South African photography, and he's also such a wonderful man. I think we owe a lot of thanks to him and to his work. So in these works, we've got 3 of these in the auction, which are all from one series, and these portraits all tell the story of a woman called Sitambe, and she lived in Tugela Ferry, which is in KwaZulu-Natal, and she moved to Johannesburg for work, and unfortunately she fell very ill with AIDS. And then this is the figure's mother. Her name is Esther, and basically Tugela Ferry is a very poor area. Sadly, its majority of the people are migrant workers. It's not very, it is quite poverty stricken. And so in an area like this, access to funds and access to medicine is very rare. And so her mother, who after she left for Johannesburg and fell really ill, her mother basically couldn't stand the idea of having her daughter sick and so far away from her. So she was able to gather some money and get her daughter hired a taxi to drive from Tugela Ferry in KZN to Johannesburg to fetch her daughter and bring her home. At the same time, the Church of Scotland was experimenting with a new drug to help HIV and AIDS, and together with what we, against all odds, both the mother's love and thanks to all the hospitals, they were able to actually save her, and she overcame her illness, which is really a remarkable story. And so there you can see this woman's mother. This is her grandchild. That is the daughter of Sitemba, and then this is I think this is another friend of hers. And so this photographic series really stands as, especially for an area that is so poverty stricken, it's really a beautiful success story. It's a story that gives hope that, with love and with all this, with the community coming together, it really shows hope in basically the face of the AIDS pandemic. And Greg Marinovich really captures this in these portraits, and these photographs, once you understand the story and hear the story, really speak volumes and really show so much power. So then moving on to just the last photograph in this is Zanele Muholi, who is a South African artist, and I think she's really taken over the contemporary art world. She's come up, she's both internationally and nationally known. She's got such a huge following, and her works really are sought after. I mean, if you just try and go through the amount of awards she's won over the past decade, I mean, the list is extravagant. So it just shows, the taking of her work to the art world and the power of her photography. Her work, she's known to be a visual activist, and her work really focuses on the race, gender, and sexuality of particularly Black LGBTQ people. And she does these very, very powerful images. As you can see in this work, the person is really looking the viewer quite dead on. The eyes are so piercing and powerful. The way they framed just so centrally with, a very powerful blazer, very strong sense, the blurred background. So it is really a powerful image. And I think really these photographs and portraits of hers are really, really sought after and have really taken well from the public. So she's a very important contemporary photographer, and I think she really just has such a huge following. And so I think that is me on the
Great, thanks Arisha, that's fascinating, thanks so much. I'll share my screen, and I think Marion is going to talk about Portia and Mishak. Hold on, can you all see my screen? You just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Okay, great. Okay, Marion, over to you.
Yeah. So I think we're all exceedingly excited to have these exceptional works of two much spoken about and collected artists, contemporary African artists. These two artists actually share quite a lot in common. They were both born in Zimbabwe and both live and work there currently. Portia was born in 1985 and Masambu in 1980. And both of them already, they're in their 30s, but they already have a considerable track record behind them. Masambu studied at the Atelier Delta and Kunstacademie in Munich, and there he was exposed to German Expressionism as well as American Expressionism, which you can very much see has been incorporated into his work. He changed from a more realistic style into this avant-garde expressionistic mode of representation, which is clearly visible here. He and Portia both, or Sabahira, both have participated in a number of international biennales. Masambu participated in 2006 Dakar Biennale, and then in the 54th Venice Biennale, which was in 2011, and represented Zimbabwe in 2016 at the Sao Paulo Biennale. And extraordinarily significantly, earlier this year, unfortunately it was before lockdown, he was invited to participate on the Sydney Biennale, where in the Contemporary Museum in Sydney, where his work was exceptionally well received. He produced these incredibly large canvases, the smallest one sort of being over 2 meters by 2 meters, and the largest one over 4 meters. And these were met with great critical acclaim, and although the Biennale is clearly not a commercial exhibition, the majority of these works have actually now been sold and are in international and local, but mostly international museums and important collections. Savayera represented Zimbabwe at the 55th Venice Biennale in 2013, and then what really launched her career locally and put the spotlight on her is when she was selected to be the 2014 FNB Johannesburg Art Fair Artist of the Year. And I'm sure many of you will remember those exceedingly large-scale works that were exhibited right in the entrance. They were absolute showstopper. This particular work, and I won't try the original title, It's Where Love Began, was bought on that exhibition. And both these artists are only newly coming onto the secondary market. So this is an extraordinary pleasure to actually be viewing these artworks. Just a little bit about these works particularly. Savayera in these works, her works very much, she talks about her dreamscapes, the sort of shifting between dreams and reality. She's very much occupied with the role of women in society, the family structure, her cultural heritage. She also looks at different forms of religion, the sort of Christianity as interpreted in Zimbabwe, the sort of Afro apostolic sects, and also Christianity. And so all of these multiple layers in these unbelievably large-scale, beautiful works. She also involves it sort of as a cultural reference, these beautiful textiles. This work is also quite intriguing in that the two figures are almost melded into one, sort of, and although she generally focuses on women, I find it unclear. It looks like it's got a bokbaki there, so it looks to me as though it might well be a male. But just this incredible embrace of the figures, and the sort of shadowed one leg that I find, the sort of ghostly appearance of the one leg, and the sort of intermingling of two people. Wonderful use of colors again, and just an extraordinary work that we're exceptionally pleased to have on our auction. If we can look at the Meshach. So Meshach, his work is very much grounded. I spoke about this expressionism, but his work is very much grounded in the conflict between figurative work and abstraction. He also deals with the conflicts of living in a society like Zimbabwe, where in this sort of post-independence era, he does a lot of social criticism. He's very aware of the socio-political aspects, the sort of socio-psychological aspects. Generally, he does these very large-scale works set in the landscape. And I was chatting to Neil Dundas about his work not so long ago. And this one is a far more internal one. It's a more interior work. It's seemingly playful. It's got these beautiful bursts of color. He also uses these very large brush strokes as a form of dealing with these conflicts and expressing himself. And we have this really fantastic lineup of birds in these legs up in the air. But if you look at the figure down below, there's definitely this undercurrent that we're so familiar with in societies where there's underlying violence and political conflict. So this is once again an extraordinary work. We are absolutely delighted to have it, and it will be a great asset to any collection. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Marion. I agree completely. I mean, these works are just so fabulous and so bold. Yeah, it's really amazing having them in our sale. And maybe if we get a chance right at the end, I can show the video sort of panning across one of the walls in our main new gallery. And people can get a sense of not only the pop of the color, but also their fantastic scale. Specs, if you're here, I think you wanted to maybe speak about the Takadiwa.
Yeah. So this sculpture, this present lot, is by Moffat Takadiwa, a Zimbabwean artist, and he currently works and lives in Harare. And he uses found objects and waste materials and turns them into something completely new. As you can see here, we're looking at computer keyboards, which he then weaved them together and formed his new language. So he was influenced by a movement which happened in 2015 in South Africa, which was the Rhodes Must Fall, a movement that the students led to bring down the sculpture of Rhodes at the University of Rhodes. And the movement later on led to a broader movement, which was decolonizing education. And influenced by these movements, he then takes keyboards that are used to communicate in a language, and by dismantling them, it's an act of decolonizing the existing language. And by weaving them together, he's forming a new language that he reimagines. So we are looking at a language that he formed in his head, and it's a beautiful language, and I certainly understand it, and most people can understand it when they look at it. It's a beautiful and fantastic language hanging on the wall. Yeah. And Alastair is going to speak about this work, comparing it to the Temple of the Sun later. But to me, it's a minimalistic artwork, but it's really complex in meaning. Yeah, I'll leave it there. And Alastair will continue by comparing it to the Temple of the Sun.
Thanks so much, Beck. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I love your description of, saying, it's a new language and you immediately understand it. I think that's fantastic. I'm sure if the artist heard you say that, he'd be absolutely delighted. But you're right. It's a beautiful object. It's a large hanging wall sculpture, and yes, dealing with incredibly weighty issues, and also, of course, very topical ones. And in many ways, it's ahead of its time. Because we've been dealing with these kind of issues in South Africa for the last few years, whereas it's really broken internationally far more recently. So a very topical work too, bearing in mind everything that's going on. But yes, as far as the language goes, we've hung this work next to this magic work by Alexis Preller, the Temple of the Sun. We've hung it, as I say, together in our galleries because although being half a century apart, they are dealing with similar things, not in terms of colonialism or post-colonialism, but the idea of language, the idea of influencing language. I think a work like this, Temple of the Sun from 1963, would be read as a palimpsest of sorts. The idea of this language or scroll or manuscript being constantly changed, scuffed out, redrawn, rewritten, sort of across different civilizations and across different cultures. And I suppose Moffat Takadiwa is doing something very similar. The idea of giving a immediately important theme a new kind of visual language. Very interesting, I think, seeing them together. You know, Preller does explore that kind of theme repeatedly throughout his career. And in terms of that abstraction, you have something very similar like the Gates, which is not 242 in our sale. This is a little later from 1968, but it's another work I think that that relates rather neatly to the printed modernity of Moffat Takadiwa. You'll notice in the Preller that fantastic gold angled frame, his period frame of choice. And I suppose it's a bit of a marker, just like you might see Zanzibari moldings on a favored stern. Preller very much enjoyed this specific molding sort of to surround his works. One of the works I'd like to talk about is related to this building. It is, of course, a well-known Johannesburg landmark. It was designed by Sir Herbert Baker and it was completed in 1909. It is, of course, the famous Villa Arcadia on the Parktown Ridge, showing off one of the best views in Johannesburg. At the time it was completed, as I say, in 1909, it would have looked over, or was then the Saxonwold forest, the forest that was planted to provide the timber for the nearby mines. A Herbert Baker design commissioned by these two very, very famous / infamous Johannesburg figures. This is, of course, Lionel Phillips on the left and Lady Florence Phillips on the right. And I'm showing you their portraits by Giovanni Boldini. The one on the left of Lionel Phillips is in the Johannesburg Art Gallery. The Florrie Phillips work, I think, is in Dublin, collected by Sir Hugh Lane. The list of cultural achievements that can be attributed to these two is long and spectacular, and Johannesburg has a lot to thank these two for. In our smaller world, the most obvious that comes to mind is the Johannesburg Art Gallery. Florence Phillips almost single-handedly brought that gallery into fruition. Of course, it was her husband's money that she used. I love these grand portraits, and of course, it gives a sense of their stature and esteem. They did fall in and out of grace, certainly as Lionel Phillips did. He was implicated in the Jameson raid in 1895. He was sentenced to death, and they eventually were pardoned with a big fine and went back to London to return a little bit later. But you know, these are fantastic photographs to compare them to. You know, that these very grand creations in paint and the reality in these photographic recordings. That's a slightly older Lionel Phillips on the left, and Florence Phillips here in the center, and she's standing with Issy Smuts at Vergelegen. Now, Vergelegen is very important because the Phillipses bought Vergelegen in 1917. I told you earlier on that they had commissioned Villa Arcadia in 1909, and they lived there until 1922, having bought Vergelegen in 1917 and spent 5 years restoring it to its sort of historic glory. And if you go visit Vergelegen now, what you see there is very much down to the wealth and sort of cultural historic eye and detail that Lady Phillips in particular was so famed for. Anyway, this work is by J.H. Pierneef, of course, and it was painted on the 2nd day of January 1918. So the Phillipses had just had just bought Vergelegen, and potentially when the long process of moving from Johannesburg down to Cape Town. But I love this work for so many reasons. Not only is it just stunningly beautiful, it's over 100 years old, and look at those colors, those wonderful magentas and pinks, and those flecks of yellow in the pergola, that fantastically clear, bright, decorative blue and white sky. I love how the gold sort of pours through these columns, pours through the bougainvillea, and catches the light, as well as the passageway on the bottom. I spent a lot of time trying to work out exactly where Pierneef would have set himself up. We all know the very famous loggia of the Villa Arcadia, and you'd expect Pierneef to set himself up there. He did not. He almost certainly set himself up here on this little breakfast stoop, which I also find fascinating and just so Pierneef. He didn't just go to the grandest view or the grandest point. He went to this little breakfast stoop outside the servery and the pantry, and he was looking sort of almost due east down the pergola here. So this is where he was, and he was facing in this direction here. Interestingly, also, that was the sort of servants' wing, the servants' hall. You'll see over here, and the servants' rooms were above. Very much the working part of this grand home. You'll see the larder, the scullery, the kitchen, of course, the valet, the so-called flower room, where they, of course, prepared all their amazing flower arrangements. And I just love the thought of a young Henk Pierneef sitting on this breakfast stoop by himself and drawing what was in front of him. I think it's an absolutely fantastic historical moment, despite the fact that it's a fantastic drawing. It also, I think, catches Pierneef at his most avant-garde in spirit. Pierneef was more experimental in the early part of his career than he was later on. He was, of course, a professional painter. He had to paint what the market wanted from him, which is why he developed a very familiar sort of monumental style in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, the kind of pictures that sold so well, the kind of iconic aesthetic for which he's sort of so well known. I did manage to find another version of this sitting in the exact same spot. This was sold by Stefan, our late boss, through his old company, Stefan Weltz and Co., probably in the early 2000s. It's not a particularly good image, but it's obviously the exact same scene. And again, I love the idea of Pierneef working the same view in multiple ways, and potentially at different times of day too. Going through some of the past works we've sold, I was struck by the fact that there are a number of fantastic Pierneef pastels and watercolors, drawings and gouaches in 1918 of very important South African buildings. So this is Libertas, sort of the president's house outside or in Pretoria, also done by Pierneef in 1918. We don't have a date for this, but done in 1918. It's also important to know what was going on in Pierneef's life at the time. I always think of him being particularly light and excited in the early months of 1918. He had spent the previous decade almost working at the State Library in Pretoria, working full-time and only painting in the little breaks he could get. But in the end of 1917, he retires or resigns from the State Library, and he actually takes up a contract with the Transvaal Education Department, and he commits to teaching starting in early 1918. But he only commits, I think, to 8 hours a week. I think he commits to taking courses, I think, on maybe Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays or something, but only 8 hours a week, which meant he had the entire week thereafter to dedicate to his painting and his art making career. This was also done, another view of Government House in 1918, spectacular facade. I mean, I'll admit we initially thought that this was Villa Arcadia, but Carmen Weltz sort of set us straight. This is another work from that time, early 1918, although this is in the Cape. And I don't know if it is documented, but it seems very clear to me that early on in 1918, for whatever reason, he was traveling around the country, but particularly up on the Highveld, looking very carefully at important architectural buildings. You need to bear in mind that his training had been in architectural draftsmanship. His father had been a builder, I suppose famous for building the first shanty brick and iron structure in Johannesburg in 1886, which was incidentally the year that Henk was born. These are other slightly later architectural renderings. This is Mombasa in early 1926. This is Bruges in 1925. And this is a fantastic work, which is on our current sale. We've just generically named it Homestead, but shows not only Pierneef's interest in architectural drawing, but very specifically in the local vernacular architecture. He loved South African architecture or South African buildings. That very much fed into his broader ideals of trying to develop some kind of South African school, and also maybe a little bit earlier into his ideas of promoting Afrikaner culture, certainly before the early 1920s. There's another work, a much later work, which is on our sale, Cape Homestead. This is Strauss by, I think, Western Cape. This is painted in 1950, so much later on in his career. But a very, I think, personal kind of a painting. It's not a big, flashy work with big camel thorns, the kind of work he was painting for his market. I think there's a much more personal kind of a picture. You can imagine him on a sort of cold Cape winter's day, overcast day, just delighting in this century-old Cape tradition. And I think it's a fantastic work. Of course, very famously in pictures like this, the Jonkershoek with Twin Peaks beyond, you see the vernacular architecture and architectural draftsmanship always coming to the fore. Very, very different picture, of course. This is Henri Rousseau, The Sleeping Gypsy. This is from 1897, and it is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I'm showing it to you because it is the direct inspiration for this fantastic, large, abstract work by Olaf Bisschoff. We have two of these works in our sale. The artist was very much playing with the idea of modernism or the idea of what else there can possibly be done in terms of making any kind of aesthetic leaps in the 21st century after the sort of textbook modernists like Henri Rousseau and Pablo Picasso had made those enormous strides a century prior. He had another work in our sale, La Demoiselles d'Avignon, which of course relates to Picasso's famous era-defining picture from 1907 of the same title. Two really fantastic abstract works, recently painted, recently on show in Stellenbosch, and fantastic to have them on auction now. I know we're running out of time, but for 1 or 2 more minutes, I'll just flash through a few things, starting off with images of 2 or 3 of my favorite mid-century British modernists, Henry Moore, Lynn Chadwick, and Kenneth Armitage. And I always try and stress the point how much of an influence these 3 artists had on some of our most important mid-century South African artists. And the connection really is this enormously chic Linda Gavon with a cigarette in her mouth. This is probably taken in 1966 or 1968. The force behind the Goodman Gallery. Now, Linda Gavon took over the careers of Ezrom Legae and Sidney Kumalo, and she introduced them to a more contemporary British modernism that was so popular at the time, which is why you have unbelievable works like the 2 on our upcoming sale, The Man on a Horse on the left by Ezrom Legae and The Reclining Nude by Sidney Kumalo. And these are the kind of works that they produced when they were under the sway of Linda Gavon and, I would argue, Kenneth Armitage, Lynn Chadwick, and Henry Moore. You know, this has such sleek, simple lines yet I can only imagine how difficult it would have been. You know, so often simplicity is the hardest aesthetic to follow. But of course, you have these sort of gently rising breasts in the center of the sculpture, and these legs here on the right with an arm, an idea of an arm held over the head. At the top portion, a beautiful patina too. But if you compare a work to similar examples by Henry Moore, for instance, I'm showing you on the right, you'll see the very clear influence. This is a work we sold last year, the Reclining Mapocha, also by Sydney Kumalo, in fact 2 or 3 years ago now. But the point I'd like to make, that although Sydney was looking at major international modernists, there was always this inherent African sense, or this inherent African flavor, which comes through particularly strongly in this Reclining Mapocha figure. Ezrom Legae's Man on a Horse is definitely one of the highlights of our auction, and I do encourage you to go and look at the fantastic video that Specs made talking about this work. It is not only a wonderfully tactile sculpture with this fantastic patina, these sort of jagged, very earthy textures all around the surface, but it has this anonymous head, this edited figure with no arms, you know, no immediate facial figures. The beast has been decapitated, essentially, and it's a deeply political work. You know, the idea of man wrangling with beast, the idea of man dealing with political injustices, which was, of course, both of these artists were dealing with. But if you look at the likes of Kenneth Armitage with his sort of spindly figures, as well as Lynn Chadwick, you'll note, I think, the influences on these artists here. I'm going to end with a David Koloane, which is one of my favorite paintings, and I think goes so neatly with the Porsche and the Mishak that Marion had spoken about a little bit earlier. David sadly passed away recently, a real titan of high-felt painting, and his Bull in the City, I think, is very similar in theme to Ezrom Legae's fantastic Man on a Horse. The idea of a social injustice, the bull being a symbol of freedom and liberation and power in this very urban environment. But we have gone just over 5, so I will stop there and I'll stop sharing my screen. But as usual, we're very happy to take any questions if there are. A few sort of announcements from me before Arisha says goodbye. Firstly, we have an incredible sale that starts on Sunday with wine, and then pictures and sculpture through Monday and Tuesday. We will be broadcasting the sale between studios in Cape Town and in Johannesburg. I would argue it's one of the highest quality South African auctions ever. And I don't say that lightly. There are really some exceptional works. Although we are very much in lockdown, our offices are open and our galleries are available for viewing. So if you would like to come and have a look at our Johannesburg galleries, you're more than welcome. Just maybe phone ahead and book a time slot. You'll most likely have the galleries to yourself for at least half an hour or so. And it is the most spectacular cross-section of South African art you'll see. Certainly at the moment.
Thank you, Alastair. And thank you to all our Joburg specialists, Marion, Wilhelm, Specs, Alastair, thank you very much for all of your input. Just to reiterate that we are open over the weekend, so please do come and join us again. This sadly is the end of our daily Zoom talks. We will be still continuing with our museum moments. And as soon as those are confirmed, everyone will be informed. But for next week, you're more than welcome to join the virtual sale, even if you want to just watch. It will be live streamed from our website. The registration for bidding is open, and you can also register for an absentee bid or a telephone bid. If you have any inquiries, please call us or email us. We are all on hand. And if you have missed any of the previous talks, they're all loaded onto our YouTube channel, along with a few other videos and some panning of the gallery. There's also our Matterport 3D gallery. So if you don't feel like leaving the house, you can still view our galleries digitally and virtually. it is a very impressive platform, if I say so myself. So if you haven't seen it yet, please go onto our website and have a look. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing everybody bidding on the auction. And if you have any queries, please let us know. But I think if there's not any questions, I'll give it a few seconds if anybody wants to unmute their mic. Okay, well then, great. So have a wonderful evening, and thank you again for joining us. And
thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.